Hey everyone, and welcome to this very early episode of the Linux and open source news because, well, over the weekend I have a Warhammer tournament and I'm not going to be able to do this, so you're getting this video a bit earlier than usual. So this week we've got the release of the Cosmic Beta and the Pop! OS 24.04 Beta, which, contrary to its name, is a current version of Pop! OS. We also have the EU looking into those super annoying cookie banners to maybe streamline this a bit and make the internet a bit less crap. And we have a bunch of other Linux, open source, privacy and open web related topics, including this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. They provide a full suite of services to make sure your open source stack is secure and up to date, no matter which Linux distro, open source app, development language or framework that you use. They have rebootless patching to automatically patch all critical systems in the background without reboot and downtime. They have endless lifecycle support for end-of-life technologies, and they also offer enterprise support for both Alma Linux and Rocky Linux. With TuxCare Enterprise support, you will get all the updates and all the fixes that you need for either Alma Linux or Rocky Linux, 24/7 support as well, including installation and migration consultations, and of course they have higher support tiers with pay-as-you-go support bundles, FIPS validated modules to ensure compliance, and more. If you use Alma Linux, they even have security hardening with automation scripts, vulnerability scanners, compliance support, and more. Whether you run Alma Linux or Rocky Linux, you do need some amount of enterprise support to make sure that you stay compliant with your own obligations, and so the link, as always, is in the description to get more information. So, right on time, or maybe half a year late if you believed in the previous release date that they had given for the beta, Cosmic has its first beta, and Pop! OS finally has an update as well, as in a major version update in beta as well. So Pop! OS 24.04, which is a terrible name if I ever saw one, because it's neither 2024 nor April, comes with the kernel 6.16, the latest NVIDIA and Mesa drivers, and updates to all the Wayland related stuff in the background, because Cosmic is Wayland only. Apart from that, it is Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, with Cosmic replacing GNOME. This means that if you used the previous version of Pop and you upgrade to that beta, or if you end up upgrading to the stable release when it's actually out, you will lose most GNOME applications by default and you'll get their Cosmic equivalents instead. The upgrade will also lose your pinned apps in the dock, because it's not the same dock, and the PPAs that you added obviously will be disabled during the upgrade, because they do tend to cause problems. As per the Cosmic Beta, it comes with most of what you would expect from a desktop environment. It is Wayland only, and X-Wayland works as expected, kind of. You also have all the usual Cosmic related features like auto-tiling, the dock, the launcher, the app grid with folders that you can create yourself, static or dynamic workspaces, and of course customization that is a bit more fleshed out than in GNOME, with settings for interface density, roundness, theme settings, and the like. Default apps are here too, with the settings, file manager, app store, terminal, text editor, and video player all being brand new Cosmic applications, and you have all the expected system tray applets to handle all the usual settings, and apparently there are a few more in the Cosmic store as well. Now, it is a beta, so it is not finished. There are a bunch of issues remaining. Notably, you cannot drag and drop content from an X-Wayland app to a Wayland app, which will absolutely need to be fixed for the final release. Some games might display off-screen, and so you'll have to press F11 to make them full screen. Accessibility is not finished. The screen reader still cannot read the contents of all the widgets Cosmic apps use. The App Store doesn't display Flatpak add-ons, which will be a big issue for Flatpak users. The text editor cannot print yet. In short, it is not finished, it is still a beta, but most of these issues are slated for implementation on the release candidate of Cosmic. Obviously, this released while I was sleeping. I think it was 5 AM for me when they pushed that out, so I could not make a dedicated video as I wanted yesterday, but you'll get a video about it next week after my nice little Warhammer tournament, and I won't just look at the features, I'll also look at the entire proposition and if it really needed to exist when you have already tons of other DEs, and why it actually did need to exist, at least for System 76. So stay tuned for that. Soon we might see an end to all these awful cookie banners. While the general idea of this EU law was good in principle, asking for websites to get user consent before storing information about them with cookies, it was clearly written by people who have no idea how cookies work or even how websites work, meaning the end implementation by websites turned out either extremely cumbersome, where you have to click something on every website you visit, or super shady, where you have an accept all button and no easy way to decline cookies. Well, the EU is looking at making all of that much simpler, the idea being that you wouldn't ask users any form of consent for cookies that are needed for the regular operations of a website, like handling shopping carts, for example, or automatically logging you in. But this would go further, with maybe even a preference in the web browser settings that would apply by default to all the websites you visit, which I think would be the best thing we could end up with. As they say, too much consent kills consent, and at some point people just do not read anything and they just click on any button so they can access the website. Some people in Brussels would also like to integrate this cookie regulation to the GDPR, where it looks like it belongs, but various privacy advocates think this is a bad idea because the GDPR doesn't really set anything as you have to do this. They set rules that then are checked to see if risks are mitigated enough, compared to the cookie regulation, which says no, you can't do that, or yes, you can do that. Now, a cookie setting in the browser that lets you say accept essentials only or accept essentials and add related automatically would absolutely be easier. It wouldn't detract from privacy in the slightest, depending on the default your web browser chooses to enable. All websites would have to do is follow this preference, and they would get a fine if it was found that they didn't follow the preference, which is very easy to check as well. I absolutely hope this ends up happening and this changes, because those cookie banners are awful. This is one prime example of a law being written by people who have zero knowledge of the subject matter and making things worse for everyone, not just for EU citizens, but for the entire world in the process, which really sucks. So hopefully we can keep the privacy with that browser setting without having all the cumbersome interaction with those cookie banners, especially on mobile, where it's absolutely horrendous. Now, we had some interesting stuff proposed to the Linux kernel over the weekend, which is multi-kernel architectures. There were two different proposals submitted to the Linux kernel to handle running different kernels at the same time without using any kind of hypervisor. Basically, you would run different instances of different Linux kernels, each running on a subset of your CPU cores. The first proposal would share every system resource except for the CPU core, which would basically let you run a normal kernel as your normal app running and workflow running kernel, and then you would run a low latency, for example, or real-time kernel, or a gaming enhanced kernel for all the tasks that need those specific configurations. So that first proposal is from Multikernel Technologies Inc. It is an open source one, and it's been submitted. It's mostly for server stuff, but it also has potential for workstations. The second proposal comes from ByteDance, the makers of TikTok. They call their own implementation Parker, and it's the exact same goal as the first proposal. They even acknowledge that it's extremely similar, except it is very different in how it is implemented and designed. So it's the same goal. You're running different Linux kernels at the same time without using KVM or any virtualization technology, so technically the performance and resource usage should be better. But ByteDance's version would go a bit further than the previous proposal, because they would partition CPU cores, the RAM, and all the devices, including hard drives, which means you would not share anything between each kernel. So you would have a primary kernel, which controls what hardware other kernels have access to and the boot process, and all other kernels would be secondary and can only interact with their assigned CPU cores, RAM, and devices. There would be no communication between those separate kernels. It still remains to be seen what the actual advantages of these proposals are compared to just running virtual machines, but apparently it would use fewer system resources, which at the scale of millions of computers in various data centers is probably going to save millions of dollars as well for companies deciding to use that. So that could be an avenue. The thing I'm seeing here is that maybe you could run your normal Linux kernel for everyday tasks, but you could run a dedicated gaming kernel. Imagine something made by Valve in collaboration with anti-cheat manufacturers or creators, and that specific gaming kernel would be what would run Steam and games, and it would have those anti-cheat kernel level modules, but you would only use them for the game that you're running, and when you're done with the game, that kernel instance is shut down, and you don't have to run what amounts to spyware on your regular kernel. It's just being spun up when you need it for a specific game and then turned off. I have no idea if that's actually possible with this multi-kernel architecture, but if it is, this could be the solution for all our gaming troubles, and that would be cool. Now this week, a new file system was also open sourced for Linux. It's called TernFS, T-E-R-N, and it's recently been open sourced, even though it's been in full use for a year and in development for 3 years. It's been worked on by XTX Markets, which is a trading firm, and they needed something specific to handle the gigantic amounts of data their algorithms use to make price forecasts on the stock market. So TernFS is a distributed file system, meaning it can access multiple drives on multiple different computers anywhere in the world through Ethernet. It was created to handle files that aren't really meant to be edited once they're written to disk, immutable files, if you will. And it's also designed to handle trillions of files, billions of directories, and millions of clients accessing all of that. It's been used to handle 10 EB of data over the usual Ethernet and commonly available network hardware. Apparently, the file system handles redundancy to better manage drive failures, and the company says that they haven't lost a single byte of data since they started using TernFS. This is made available under the GPL v2 and Apache 2.0. It's on GitHub, and we'll see if it's ever proposed for inclusion in the kernel by someone at some point. Now, of course, this is not something that you'll use on your own workstation or server. It is not designed for single person or small company sized use. But it is interesting to see that every time a company needs something custom, whether it's a graphical user interface, a custom config for a kernel, or a custom file system, they just go to Linux because nothing else works. You could try and do that on Windows and macOS, but it is going to be an absolute pain because the open source nature of Linux makes it just much easier. So always interesting to see that, yes, our system of choice is just the best option every time you just don't want the it works for everyone solution that never really works for everyone. Now, still on file systems, let's talk about BcacheFS. They now have a DKMS module that is built into a Debian or Ubuntu package, and so Phoronix performed some tests to see if that package matched the performance of the version of BcacheFS that is already in the Linux kernel. But they also compared it to other file systems in a bunch of benchmarks. And let's be frank, the performance of this file system for most operations seems pretty abysmal compared to what is traditionally used on Linux, like XFS, BetterFS, and ext4. The DKMS package seems to soundly beat what is currently in the Linux kernel 6.17, which is normal because the Debian package will contain newer code with more optimizations and fixes that the kernel version of BcacheFS will likely never get. Generally though, if you want fast reads and writes, fast database access and writes, and generally good performance on SSDs, which is what this has been all tested on, you probably do not want to use BcacheFS. Even the venerable ext4 beats it. As a matter of fact, ext4 actually beats every other file system that has been tested here on average, including BetterFS, XFS, OpenZFS, and F2FS. Which goes to show that sometimes the tried and tested solution is actually better than the newer hyped ones, or even the ones that have been here for 5 or 6 years and are being touted as the future. Sometimes the good old ext4 is just better than everything else. Of course, if you want full stability, resiliency, system snapshots, ext4 is not what you're going with, but generally for a workstation or a basic server, I think ext4 is still where it's at, and BcacheFS really needs a lot of work to even match that kind of performance yet. Now let's talk about the open web, because this seems like a big loss. The US government announced that they struck a deal with China over the TikTok US version debate. Now, to be noted, neither China nor ByteDance have confirmed that this deal is indeed happening, at least they haven't confirmed it yet. Under these new terms though, the US version of TikTok would effectively be siloed from the TikTok everyone else sees. The application would likely be relaunched with a US version fully trained on US TikTok user data only, so the algorithm would very likely only promote and show US-made content. The algorithm would be audited by Oracle and operated by a joint venture of US investors. Now, this is a double mistake, in my opinion. Because first, it means for TikTok, it is a problem. They would lose all of their advantages on the algorithm. The algorithm is the only thing making TikTok better than other solutions because it tends to recommend stuff that really resembles what you're looking for. Letting Oracle analyze it and monitor it means they have control of it. They have access to the source code. You cannot check an algorithm does what it's supposed to do if you don't know how it's supposed to rank recommendations first. So under that deal, TikTok basically would give up control of their original algorithm. They could also evolve their own algorithm on their own side and leave the US one lingering, but that's still a big competitive advantage that TikTok has that would just be gone. Second, it also means US users of TikTok would be cut off from any content that is not made in the US, or at least chances are they won't get that sort of content recommended to them anymore, which is a nice way of building a big fat echo chamber of US-only ideas, memes, and reflections and view of the world. Fortunately, this could also just result in people leaving TikTok altogether and going somewhere else, because not only will the algorithm change, but the content that's being recommended through it and its origin would change too, and people do not like their recommendations being altered at all. I've always felt like TikTok is pure garbage and cringe content, but if I leave my bias, I've always felt TikTok is a terrible platform, but if I leave my bias against that, it feels like this is a horrendous thing for US citizens. It is basically limiting what kind of content you have access to. It is giving the keys of the kingdom to another billionaire and their company. I don't think it's good for the open web. I don't think it's good for freedom of ideas, for freedom of opinion, for generally building a different worldview than just what you know. So yeah, hopefully TikTok and ByteDance haven't signed that deal yet. Hopefully they reject it. We haven't heard from them yet, so we don't really know. I don't think this is good, and I hope this doesn't go through. Still on the open web, who could have guessed Microsoft would be the ones to actually start being ethical when it comes to AI? Well, at least giving indications of trying to build something ethical, maybe by accident. Microsoft apparently is in talks with several publishers in the US to launch a publisher content marketplace, which would pay publishers for their content when it is used by AI models, including Copilot. Now, it is just a first pilot program with a limited selection of publishers. They would expand that over time. Apparently, Microsoft used the message, "You deserve to be paid on the quality of your IP," which is very nice to say now that they've already grabbed everything publicly available and built a first sort of business model out of it. Of course, this is not being done out of the goodness of their hearts. Every AI company is seeing lawsuits coming their way, closer and closer, more and more lawsuits, and showing good faith towards publishers could definitely help with alleviating future lawsuits. If you announce that you're building such a platform, some publishers that wanted to sue you could wait and look at that program and see if it's suitable. It's also likely that Microsoft wants to be the first to have such a platform, so they can then strong-arm other companies into paying publishers as well. They could say, hey, see, that content is valuable and we are paying for it. And so publishers would look at what other AI companies are doing and they would say, hey, you need to pay us for the content. Most AI companies could never afford to pay publishers, so they would very likely get sued by the publishers that have a deal with Microsoft, where Microsoft would just remain the only big provider of AI because they are the only ones that are actually giving money to people who should get money for their work. Now, on the one hand, I am glad that content creators and publishers could potentially finally make some money off of their work in case of AI training. But on the other hand, this is what AI companies should have opened with. This shouldn't be the final step in the long process of building an AI tool. It should have been the first step, approaching publishers and saying, hey, we want to pay you to get your content to train our AI. Now, also, this is just a pilot program. This is one lawsuit away from being fully dissolved into vaporware or vapor tech, because obviously if a judge says, hey, you know what, grabbing everything publicly available is fair use, you can train your model on it, there's no problem whatsoever. Microsoft will shut down that program, because why would they pay anyone if they don't have to? So it is not something that is really future-proof right now, but it is a good indication. Now, obviously, this is not ethical because Microsoft likes content publishers and wants to compensate them fairly. It is ethical by accident. Now, you might remember Malibal, the PC seller that caused quite a bit of controversy for telling people Coreboot was a scam and that they tried to rip them off, where most people who worked with Coreboot developers or tried to add Coreboot support to their hardware said it was certainly a skill issue on Malibal's part. Then that company decided to ban the shipping of their devices to countries from which developers they didn't like came from, and even some United States as well, where they're now going to try and pursue made in USA laptops instead. This is what they call Project Liberation, a truly American name if I ever saw one, trying to make a full USA-based supply chain over the next few years. They're gonna start with the keyboards, but they're also going to include open source firmware, and then in the future they would move on to building displays and batteries in the US, motherboards in the US, and finally the complete laptop. They estimate it would take 24 months and about $5 million when you add up manufacturing, the supply chain, R&D, and the initial production run. Of course, they don't have that kind of cash lying around, so they are looking for investors instead. Now, I am regularly pining for an EU-based open source stack to replace big tech companies from the US, so I'm not going to be hypocritical and say that a US-made laptop would make absolutely no sense. Some people really like their country where they were born. Some people want to support local jobs, local manufacturing. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I do that with a bunch of companies in France to support their business. So no problems for me here. What I do have a problem with is this company. They are a joke. They've been clowning around the whole internet for a while, and their consumer reviews are generally pretty terrible. Their consumer support seems to be awful. They treated people they worked with really badly, so I would not trust them to be able to accomplish anything on that part. You just have to look across the internet to see why this is not a company you should give your money to. But as always, this is a personal decision to invest your money into something that you want to support. I do the same for French companies. I like supporting EU-based initiatives instead of US-based initiatives, so if someone in the US wants to support a USA-made laptop, then that's fine with me. What is also fine is our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. They don't make the computers in the US, but they're based in Germany and the EU. You all know about Tuxedo by now if you've been listening to a single episode of this show. They've been sponsoring us for more than 3 years now. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They are really, really solid devices. I personally only use their stuff nowadays. I don't have a single computer that I use daily that is not made by Tuxedo. That includes the laptop that I use to do everything that you can see or hear from me on this channel, and that also includes my gaming computer, which is a Tuxedo Cube running Nobara. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, and you want to support a company that actually contributes to Linux, click the link down in the description and check out Tuxedo Computers. Anyway, this will conclude today's episode. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are and why you should click them. Please do so the channel can keep growing and I can keep making those videos. You also have plenty of links in the description to support the channel if you want to do so. Thank you all for watching or listening in the background, and I guess you'll see me in the next one next week. Bye!